Hello fanatics, welcome to another true crime story time. Yeah, I'm back. I am enjoying looking into all these several cases. I have a case for you today. As you know, I've started in recent weeks to try and associate my diamond painting to some kind of crime. I know it's a bit of a weird one, but you know, we're Diamond Painting Fanatics and I work on so many different paintings that I try to incorporate some kind of crime into the project I'm working on. Not always, just here and there to spice things up a little bit. So today I am working on my butterflies from Crafty Diamonds, and I came across a case. And the case, it's in the early 1920s. The case is dubbed, quote, the butterfly murders. Do you see what I did there? So, let's dive in. Before we do, please get comfy, grab your project, come work alongside me. Yeah, I know you guys are enjoying it, and Cami very kindly left me a comment on my Henry episode saying that she enjoys listening to my true crime while diamond painting herself. So thank you, Cami. It's nice to know they're being enjoyed. Okay, so this is about the murders of Dorothy King and Louise Lawson in the early 1920s, and as I said, they were dubbed the butterfly murders because the victims were beautiful young women drawn to the bright lights of Broadway like insects to a flame. Butterflies generally do not fly at night, but somehow the moth murders of Broadway just doesn't have the same ring to it. Okay, the similarities in their deaths may lead people to believe that the murders were somehow linked. Each of the women came from humble beginnings and found moderate success in New York, where they were both introduced to rich, powerful men who were interested in their talents, not necessarily their acting ability. What definitely ties them together is that more than 80 years after they occurred, neither crime has been solved. So we do have an unsolved case today. I know some of you don't like that. You like the pretty ribbon and hearing that they're in jail for the rest of their lives, but it was the 1920s. They didn't have forensics and all the power tools we have today in the true crime world. There are theories in each case and a strong indication that the identity of the man responsible for Dorothy, but no one was ever prosecuted. A robbery motive explains why Louise Lawson was killed, but again, no arrests were made in her case. Okay, let's begin with the Dorothy King murder. It was in March 1923 that the term sugar daddy first entered the American language thanks to a murder in high society New York. Dorothy King, known as Dot to her friends, grew up in the poverty of a first-generation Irish immigrant family in the slums of Harlem, but managed to put her petite figure and natural beauty to work as a model in the shops of Manhattan. It was there she began to meet the Broadway upper-class crust of New York society. She may have been acquainted with Arnold Rothstein. They shared some mutual friends. She had been married once to a chauffeur, and it was from him that she gained entry into that particular culture of Manhattan that was full of old money and the new guys on the scene, the bootleggers and the racketeers. The marriage ended in divorce after Dot's husband, by her own admission, caught her cheating. She appeared in only one Broadway production, Broadway Brevities of 1920, which played at the Winter Garden Theatre for 105 performances in autumn and winter of 1920. Also in the cast was a young man on the cusp of stardom, Eddie Cantor. While her hard-working family believed she was working as a model and an aspiring Broadway actress, Dorothy had actually left both modelling and Broadway behind in favour of a career of an honest-to-goodness vamp. Dorothy found more success amid the candlelight of her boudoir than among the limelight of Broadway. She described in the press of the day as, quote, a lady with more charm than virtue, end quote. Dot became a popular feature of the New York social scene, particularly the nightclubs and the speakeasies. There she met a number of wealthy and powerful men, including the son of President Warren Harding's Attorney General, and formed a special relationship with the millionaire son-in-law, one of the wealthiest men in America, Edward T. Stotesbury. She also made the acquaintance of a well-to-do Puerto Rican steel magnate named Albert, who would eventually loot his company and resort to stock fraud to keep up with his richer fellow contestants for Dot's affections. Stotesbury's son-in-law, J. Kersley Mitchell, was the man Dot dubbed her sugar daddy, and he set the pace for all the sugar daddies who would follow. He set Dot up in a small but luxurious apartment at 144 West 57th Street in New York City, within spitting distance of Central Park. He showered her with jewels, furs, and other clothes, and although they were never seen together in public, he was a frequent visitor to the apartment. It would never do for Mitchell, who was past 50, to be seen in the company of the 20-something Dot, because not only was he well known as a financial leader on the East Coast, he was also quite married. Blackmail was a popular pastime in the 1920s. I think it's still quite popular, but Mitchell took pains to protect himself from anyone who sought to use his relationship with Dot to their own gain. He was, however, not totally discreet. He frequently wrote affectionate letters to Dot, which she kept in the apartment. Whether she wrote back is a mystery. Despite his indiscretion in writing to Dot, whenever Mitchell, who used the name Mr. Marshall, visited the girl, he was accompanied by his attorney, John Jackson, who referred to him as Mr. Wilson. Typically, after scooping out the lobby of the apartment, Jackson would signal for Mitchell that the coast was clear. Together they would ride up to the 4th floor where Dot kept her apartment. Jackson would join the couple for a drink or two and then take his leave. Mitchell and Dot would do whatever they did in private, and then Mitchell would leave after a few hours. The elevator attendant told the press after the murder that Mitchell always tipped well to ensure the elevator picked up no other passengers while he rode. Side note, seems like a lot of work for an affair. Mitchell and Albert, the Puerto Rican from earlier, were the only two men who were allowed to visit Dot's apartment. While Mitchell gave her gifts, Albert gave her bruises and black eyes. Despite his violence, he was apparently a jealous lover. Albert was a welcome visitor to the love nest. March the 14th, 1923 was just like most other days in the life of Dorothy Keenan King. According to her maid, she greeted Mitchell for a luncheon rendezvous. Mitchell was, as usual, joined by Jackson, presented Dot with a bouquet of orchids. Wrapped around the stems of the flowers was a diamond and jade bracelet. It was just one of a number of baubles that Mitchell had presented to her over their relationship. Over time, it was estimated that Mitchell and her other lovers had given her at least $15,000 in jewellery. Dot received jewels worth almost $250,000 in today's market. The maid and Jackson left, and after spending the early evening alone, the couple left by the elevator, returning around midnight. A couple of hours later, Mitchell left by himself. The lift operator confirmed that Mitchell departed around 2:30 a.m. No one else was seen entering Dot's apartment, but it wasn't necessary to use the elevator or even the main stairway to get to the flat. Apartments on the 4th and 5th stories had access to a private staircase that allowed residents and their guests to leave by a side entrance. Which begs the question, why didn't Mitchell ever use that stairway if it was so private, and just tipping off everyone for covert operations? But anyway, between 2:30 and 11 a.m. March 15, someone entered the apartment while Dot was there alone. When her maid arrived for work the next morning, she let herself in. It wasn't unusual for Dot to be in bed at that late hour, because it was from the crowd that she ran with that New York became known as the city that never sleeps. However, when the maid went in to wake her mistress, she found Dot dead in her bed, clad in only a silky blue negligee. The apartment was a mess. Pictures were thrown about the room, and it appeared to the maid that the apartment had been ransacked, as if someone was searching for something. At first, the investigators thought Dot had killed herself, simply because there were no apparent signs of a struggle. The apartment was messy, but at first glance, nothing indicated that a murder had occurred. When the police surgeon arrived, however, he quickly ruled out that conjecture. Her body was found in an unnatural position, with her legs curled beneath her. There were bruises around her neck, which led authorities to believe that she had been strangled. The time of death was estimated at somewhere around 6 a.m. based on her body temperature and rigor mortis. A search of the bedclothes uncovered the actual murder weapon. It was a bottle of chloroform. There was no cotton or gauze that Dot could have used to overdose on the chemical. Furthermore, it was almost impossible to use chloroform to commit suicide. The drug requires small regular doses administered over time just to achieve unconsciousness. The harshness of the gas also prevents a person from smothering themselves with a deep breath. The maid discovered 2 important clues, although neither would provide the identity of her killer or killers. The $15,000 in jewellery was missing, as were all the letters Mitchell had written. It was either a case of blackmail or robbery, police guessed. I'm no detective. I like to think I'm an armchair detective, but I mean, if you're going to rob, you rob. Why would you want letters? Suspicious. When the news of Dot's murder became public, Mitchell immediately presented himself to police for questioning and was cleared because he could provide an alibi. Let me guess, it was Jackson. The alibi was Jackson. A friend of Dot's told police that she had recently considered filing charges against Albert because he had threatened her and attempted to get her to participate in a blackmail scheme. Albert was quickly brought in for questioning and held on suspicion of murder. In the course of the police investigation of his activities, they would uncover a stock fraud scheme that he was promoting. Eventually, Albert would plead guilty to fraud and serve a 3-year federal prison term. But as for Dot King's murder, Albert had an airtight alibi. He produced 2 witnesses, Edmund McBrien and a woman who at the time was only identified as an attractive blonde, who swore Albert was with them at the time Dot was murdered. Although he was always suspected of at least participating in the crime, Albert was not prosecuted. For 6 years, the case remained an open investigation that vexed police. It was not until the, quote, attractive blonde resurfaced that authorities got any new leads. The blonde was Aurelia Fisher Dreyfus, who was McBride's girlfriend, testified before a grand jury that she was with Albert that night. In October 1929, Aurelia, who had been married and divorced since that night, was at a yacht club party in Washington, D.C. with McBride. According to McBride, she was intoxicated and he took her out on a balcony to get some fresh air. While he went back inside for their coats, Aurelia either fell or jumped or was pushed from the balcony. Her injuries were fatal. She was unconscious when she was brought into a local hospital. There, according to her mother and sister, she made a stunning confession before she succumbed to her injuries. Quote, I perjured myself in the Dot King murder, she said, also implying that McBride had pushed her from the balcony. Despite her deathbed confession, Aurelia's statement was not enough to charge Albert with Dot's murder. Now, let's carry on before I make judgment. Oh no, okay, we're moving on to Louise's murder. Okay, so, she said that she perjured herself in the Dot King murder and that her boyfriend had pushed her off the balcony. Bear in mind that her and her boyfriend said that they were with Albert that night. So what she's saying is that she was not with Albert that night. So that confession would not be enough to charge Albert, would it? Because I personally, I don't know if you agree. This is why I like the comment section, so you can let me know down below. I honestly think that Mitchell and Jackson were the ones that may have murdered Dot, because it is stated, I mean, we don't know for sure, obviously it's 1920, we can't sort of go back and review videotapes or anything, but it did say earlier that only 2 people were sort of welcomed into her apartment, and it was Mitchell and Albert. I'm not ruling Albert out, but I honestly believe it was Mitchell and Jackson. Okay, moving on to the murder of Louise Lawson, who is known as Lou. She was 24 years old when she was murdered in her apartment at 22 West 77th Street, around the corner from the Museum of Natural History in Manhattan. Among the young ladies of Walnut Springs, Lou was known as one of the most talented performers. She sang in the local church choir and was a piano virtuoso. By the time she was 12, with little experience and only dreams for support, she left Texas at 18 to find fame and fortune as a Broadway performer. After 6 years, fame was still elusive. She was a chorus girl in the Flo Ziegfeld's Follies in the early part of 1921, earning $75 per week. She appeared as an extra for $20 in the D.W. Griffin film Way Down East with Lillian Gish. Beyond that, Lou's performing career was lackluster, and police were only able to establish that she had earned $275 during her career in New York City. Like Dot, she came to the attention of the speakeasy and nightclub crowd and eventually gave up public performances in favour for, quote, private shows. It may have been a blow to her small town morals, but it was a sound investment. At the time of her death, Lou was regularly depositing $500 per week into her bank account. As for Gerhard, I'm going to call him Dahl, because if you are a true crime fanatic, you'll know that I don't do names very well. Dahl, who Lou called Jerry Doll, see, she struggled too, came forward immediately after Lou's body was discovered and explained his innocent relationship with Lou. He did not categorically deny any intimacy, however. Miss Lawson was an accomplished pianist and I was interested in her talent, he said. So as far as any other inferences are concerned, they are cruel defamations of the dead, he said. Dahl denied being the source of Lou's $500 per week allowance and could not shed any light on anyone else who might have known her. Regardless, Lou was living large in New York. Her apartment was filled with only the finest furniture and oriental rugs, a baby grand piano, original paintings and expensive vases. Police could never find any cancelled checks indicating that she had paid for these items herself. For non-human company, she shared the flat with a purebred Cairn Terrier, a dog that can cost as much as $700 today, named Texie. The end for Lou came on February the 8th, 1924, nearly a year after the Dot King murder. In the early morning, two, quote, serious-looking men arrived at Lou's apartment house, dubbed, quote, the monastery, with a large case. In the elevator going up to her apartment, in stage whispers, they discussed a bootleg liquor delivery for her, which was overheard by Thomas Kane, the elevator operator. It wasn't the first time the men had appeared at Lou's apartment, because Kane and others recalled a similar incident about a month earlier, when two men brought another case of booze. Lou, who had company at the time, refused to let the men in. A friend said, quote, We brought gin and she wanted rye. You know how women are. A mutual friend of Dot and Lou, Charlotte Wakefield, told police about the earlier visit and how much it upset Lou. Quote, She wasn't expecting any deliveries like that and shouted through the door that she wouldn't accept it, Charlotte said. The men were evidently more successful on Friday, February 8th. They apparently gained entrance to the apartment where they tied Lou up with silken hose and torn slips of filmy underwear, gagged her with a piece of cloth and covered her mouth with surgical tape. She suffocated to death. Just like Dot, Lou was discovered later by her maid. A search of the apartment revealed that some $20,000 in jewellery was missing. Texie was tied up in another room. Through interviews with other residents, police suspected that Lou knew her killers and that they had been in the apartment before because Texie was a frequent barker. No such sounds came from the apartment around the time Lou was murdered. The case quickly went cold, except for the theory that Lou had been the victim of an organised gang of thieves who preyed on women in their situation. On the door to her apartment was a message in code that was eventually deciphered as Louise Lawson is alone so long. Apparently the gang frequented the same nightclubs that both Dot and Lou belonged to. They would observe each woman had jewels and furs worth taking, or which had sugar daddies supporting them. The women were then set up by the gang. In Lou's case, they were looking for jewels, while the police believed that Dot was accidentally killed by someone who was looking for evidence to blackmail her lover. That was before one friend of a lover of Dot's claimed to have perjured herself in the investigation into the woman's death. The girl seldom squeals, one victim told police. She's afraid to. If they get her jewels, she tells her friends that she lost or hocked them. In addition to looking for the two killers seen by Kane, police unsuccessfully searched for the gang's female spotter, who was used by the gang to win the confidence and friendship of the target and gain access into her apartment. There was another, more sinister explanation for Lou's killing. Dot and Lou were always together a lot before Dot was murdered, said another member, Hilda Ferguson. Quote, I always thought that Lou knew too much about Dot's death than she dared tell, and that she could have implicated certain people, end quote. Louise Lawson was buried in the cemetery in her birthplace of Alvarado, Texas. Wow, you guys. Armchair detectives at the ready. Well, we're not even armchair detectives, are we? We're not armchair detectives. We are diamond painting detectives. What do you think? Was it some covert gang? Yeah, I've kind of changed my mind. I don't know if Mitchell and Jackson killed Dot now. It certainly looked that way. But Mitchell and Jackson were involved with Dot. They weren't necessarily involved with Lou. So, but wait a minute. If Lou knew that Mitchell and Dot were a thing, and she suspected the same as I do, he done it once, why not take out the rumours and the speculation and the person that knows too much? Her friend Lou. So it still kind of fits, but it's down to you guys. You have to leave me your thoughts down below. I want who you think done them, who you think did the murders. Is Mitchell and Jackson involved? Was it just a gang? Was it just a robbery? This has been a very interesting case. I like that I try to find cases that fit into the theme of my diamond painting, because this has led me to this mystery. So, there you go, you guys. I hope you've enjoyed today's episode. I have. But, yeah. Thank you so much for joining me. And I look forward to reading your whodunits in the comments section. The butterfly murders. Very, very tragic. She was 24 years old. I don't think we discussed how old Dot was. I'm not sure how old Dot was. Thank you so much for joining me. Thank you so much for keeping me company. And I shall see you next week in another episode of my true crime story time. Stay safe out there. Bye.